Content warning. This podcast contains bones, blood, smut, and swear words.
Get in, losers. We're going speculating.
Act 5, to walk with the dead.
Roman numerals.
Act 4, to walk with the dead forever.
Warning. This portion of the podcast is 98% spoilers and like 2% snickering.
Seriously, we will spoil anything and everything in the series up through None of the Ninth. If that's not what you want, turn back now.
Thank you for going slow, because as somebody who listens up to this point suddenly has to scramble for my phone to like, ah!
Nice to see you guys. See you in a couple hours, John. Bye. Before we talk about anything else, it's very important to me to share what you and I learned before the record today, which is that John's full name is John Paul. And now it's even fucking funnier because he's going to start with learning that God is his name. And then when we get fucking Paul as Palamides Camilla, I feel like John is going to embody all of the fighting gods, is what I'm trying to say. If we can just get Orion in there, then we literally can have him torn into 3 pieces and watch him duel out, you know, for humanity.
For reasons, when I have the group chat up, right, and it puts little initials next to people's names, John's name on the group chat for, like, not his last name does not start with G, but his name on my group chat is JG. And so I just started noticing that JG is in my group chat.
It's still fucking funny. I feel like we need to have him like dress up as the emperor for every Halloween starting next year.
Oh my God, poor man. Did you also notice that there was a reference to EJG?
Yes, I did, actually. Sorry, I forgot to put that in here. Do you want to start with that even? What is the E there?
Emperor.
Oh my God. See, that feels weird though, because everybody else is just doing it based on initials, and they're giving his title in the middle of that.
But I think it's Anastasia who is writing that note, and so she would have been one of the lictor hopefuls who grew up with him as the emperor and not as a peer.
I understand that. Whereas, you know, obviously Augustine and Mercy are like, okay,
John.
we worked with you for, yeah, it's John. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right. We can leave that alone. Do you want to start with their stuff, or do you want to start with some of the things we're thinking about?
I don't know how much I want to talk about their stuff other than to be like, well, they're pretty much fucking there. I do think that it's hilarious. The thing that I'll point out is I think that it is hilarious that John has absolutely clocked it. Next thing they're doing is they're going to go back to Dulcinea.
Yep.
Not for the reasons that he thinks, but that is the exact next step. I can't wait for the screaming over the next couple hours as he reads.
Oh yeah, literally. We're going to get a text in like 20 minutes.
Also, this is like 36 is like it, right? Like that is because 37 is Harrow finishing the fight and the epilogue is her being taken off planet, right?
Can confirm.
Yeah.
This is like 36 really is next episode
and also
is the end.
Yeah. Like as listeners, you should know this is absolutely fucking cruel because we are not recording next week. He has to sit with that for 2 fucking weeks.
Poor baby. But he's gonna, I think they're both going to feel super vindicated because they both at this point are really strong on Dulcinea as a lictor. They're going to feel good about understanding who the other dead body in the incinerator is. I actually really appreciated some of Brooke's like obsession about the demon that entered Column's body, because that's something we still don't totally understand. And, you know, she won't understand for a while. I actually loved that John kind of like almost hit the fact that other planets must also have souls, which ends up being the driving force of Harrow the Ninth and technically Nona the Ninth.
Yeah. And Brooke really picking up on, well, what Ianthe is talking about. She's like, well, she's talking about a soul or whatever. And that's something that you really pick up on again. I think that like we can drive into this a little bit more in a sec of what is Ianthe's purpose in becoming a lictor? Because she saw what lictorhood was, and she has another purpose. And her purpose has to do with, she is a liminal magician. She cares about the river. She cares about what happens to souls. She cares especially about resurrection theory. I kind of ascribe to the fan theory that what Ianthe's goal is Ianthe's goal is to become God. She doesn't want to be a lictor. She wants what God has.
But it's not even, I think like care and want are the wrong words to use when you're talking about Ianthe, because I don't think she has that much like emotional depth most of the time. She just likes winning. Like, I think it's actually as straightforward as that. Is she likes to be the person in power. She likes to be number one. She likes to be the greatest necromancer of her generation. Like, her whole monologue is about how I won and you guys didn't even know. It's not about how insane this is or how she's going to live forever or what she's going to do with that power. She's just a person who fucking loves to win. So I love the idea that her whole goal is to like kill and replace God so she can be Emperor Ianthe.
Yes, and I think that there is still something more like that we don't know that speaks to the really fucked up dynamics between her and Corona. And the fact that she has this mysterious kind of why she's been working so hard. Like, we know why Harrow has been working so hard since childhood, but we don't know why Ianthe has been working so hard since childhood, other than to just cover up for Coronabeth. And that would explain some of it, but it wouldn't explain her deep interest in resurrection theory and her decision to become a lictor, whereas everybody else who sees what it costs is like, oh, fuck no.
Don't forget, though, that she has a bad personality and a stupefying lack of attention.
Yes, there is that. My hesitation, and I think that there may be something extra, are things that she says to Corona in Nona, where she references the work, that they've had a plan. And so I'm interested to see what that is. I think that we start seeing hints of it here, and it's easy to pass it off and not look too much into it because it's Ianthe villain monologuing. But
the fact even that she chose to spend so much time focused on resurrection theory, on energy transfer, like, that's like a very unusual place to put your necromantic energy. So yeah, I mean, I think she's thinking about things more broadly than I'm giving her total credit for. And I will agree.
I think
that
it's
also
both.
kind of like feeds into, to some degree, Corona's like deep hurt at being left behind is like if they've been working on a project together and then it actually could be a circumstance where Ianthe realized she couldn't kill Corona. She couldn't take her with. Yeah.
Because it would be antithetical to the work. And also because of the way that Ianthe is and the way that she treats Corona, she hasn't been telling Corona what's been going on this entire time. And so Corona can't trust her, you know? And
Corona's totally in the dark. Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about the idea of liminal magic? Because I'm not totally sure. So Ianthe says some weird fucking shit here. She says the place between death and life, and that's a place between, right? That makes sense for liminal. That's the edge of things. But that is a weird concept. The idea that potentially the river is not actually death, that the river is some sort of like liminal space between true death and what we know of as life, right? She talks about the place across the river.
And this would fit in with like things that we learn in Harrow and Nona, where I think there's also another good reason why Ianthe immediately attaches herself to Augustine, who is
like the river guy. He's the river magician. He's the, right? I mean,
I think that we get lots more hints in Harrow of what it is, but basically I think that Ianthe, because she's been studying this, is on the same page, strangely, as Abigail Pint, in that it's heretical, but the river is not supposed to exist. The river is something that Jod created when the resurrection happened. And after 10,000 years, things are getting weird. And
right. She says it's where the things are that eat us. And it's almost as if like in that space, they've collected souls and those souls have gone insane and have turned to monsters. That like that's not just about them being dead. It's about the river being a place of almost evil.
And she does talk about it's not just resurrection theory. It is specifically the energy behind resurrection theory what price the resurrection? What price did the emperor have to pay in order to resurrect an entire planet, in order to resurrect all of these souls? And maybe she does have a suspicion that the 10 billion are not, that they've been set aside. Where are they? Right?
Yeah. No, I think it's really, really interesting.
When we were asking, like, how Brooke and John felt about lictorhood now that they actually truly knew what it was, and like, were there any circumstances where they would choose to do it? And I was like, good Lord, Hannah, like, why would you put that in there for me to try and answer that? Because I started to try and answer it and then was like, oh, I can't say anything until after we learn about like Harrow and then like Augustine and Mercy, because like the only way that I can imagine it is doing it under duress in the way that Harrow did it, in which case you are becoming a lictor to save other people and you think that you can keep yourself from going full lictor.
Yes. Well, and it's a combination of like the stakes are really high. I have to have this power in order to save the people around me. And then Harrow also has this thing of like Gideon is basically already dead. This is actually the only way to maintain her soul.
Right.
Like this is the only, so it's a weird, it's a weird way of saving Gideon while eating her.
Yeah. So like Brooke was saying from the beginning, and it just made me itch and be like, oh, I can't wait until we get like most of the way through Harrow and you realize what an asshole Jod is, because Brooke was saying, did anybody actually have a choice to not try to do this horrible thing? Did anyone actually have a choice? Or were they forced into it? Could they have actually left? And I was like, no, it's like everything that Jod does. He gives you a false choice. He makes you think that you are doing it out of piety. He makes you think that it is the right thing to do, or he drives you into doing something horrific and then says it wasn't really your fault. I will take the blame.
Yes, all of this. And the other thing is that when you do something that he finds egregious, he gets to choose whether or not you live or die. And to some extent, he gets to choose maybe even what you remember. So like it is an inherently coercive situation, a deeply inherently coercive situation. And actually the only person that we really like understand why they became a lictor is Cytherea. And Cytherea she says that she and Loveday thought that it was going to be the only way to keep her alive. This was something they like agreed on, that they just didn't want her to die. And this is kind of what I was saying. Like, I would give up myself for somebody that I care about a lot, but that's not a healthy thing to do. That's not a fucking normal thing to do, but it's something that is very human and is understandable. Yeah. In contrast, something like Augustine, where it's like, oh, kill your brother so that you can have ultimate power. I don't know what that looked like, what that decision was.
The next thing was like the answer of like, would you become a lictor? And John was like, well, it depends. Could you lictor somebody you hated? Right.
Right.
And I was like, ooh, can't talk about this too much more. Right. Because it's a really important part of Ianthe's character as a lictor, that she is the only lictor we see who did not deeply, deeply love the person she is really trying to combine with.
I mean, I still think even like Harrow wouldn't, well, this is a bad example. I was about to say Harrow would not casually stab Silas in the back in order to become a lictor, but then I was like, actually, maybe that's like the one person she would. But, like, I think most people wouldn't even kill an enemy to do that necessarily. Ianthe's kind of something else, but it's certainly pretty obvious and poignant that like everybody else, I mean, can you fucking imagine Isaac and Jean-Marie or Magnus and Abigail? It would never, because you would never, ever, 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 ever come close to hurting somebody that you loved that much.
But there's even a bigger point. It doesn't work.
Yes. Well, I mean, it doesn't, first of all, the whole thing doesn't work perfectly regardless, right? But additionally, Ianthe is fighting with Babs throughout all of the book Harrow the Ninth. And it's certainly in the chapters we read today, like it's obvious. There's literally a moment when she's like talking to herself and she's like, pull it together. You almost lost that one, right? Like it does not work if that soul is still fighting back, which tells you that that soul still has some integrity.
Later on, I think when Cytherea is fighting with Ianthe, she mentions this as well, basically being like, Loveday did this willingly.
Yeah, your cavalier didn't want to go.
It was still like incredibly painful and took me years.
1,000 years. Yeah. Yeah. The integration is not which is also an interesting thing. Again, that says that the soul has agency all on its own, that it can push and pull in its own way.
Yeah.
Oh,
which I guess comes back to, I still find it fascinating that I understand why Mercy and Augustine did it, being forced into it. And I don't think that they would have done it if Alfred and, who am I
Christabel.
thinking of? Christabel. If Alfred and Christabel hadn't forced them, I don't think they would have done it. But I think probably the calculus is in that moment of pain and a snap decision, you're like, well, we just got a text from John that says, son of a bitch, God damn it.
Way less than 20 minutes.
So he's just learned that Dulcinea is Cytherea.
And he has 2 weeks to sit on that before he can talk about it. He's coming over later for D&D. He's going to be so mad.
Anyway, where were we?
Oh, this why you would become a lictor. The idea that like maybe the others followed along once Mercy and Augustine did it, and maybe Mercy and Augustine only did it because Alfred and Christabel sort of forced them. And it's exactly, you understand why Harrow becomes a lictor, because you're right. It's a snap judgment in that moment where this person you love is dying in front of you.
Yeah.
You wonder how many of these things were based on suicides. Like, it's horrible.
Yeah. Well, and like emotional coercion, all of this stuff. And I can imagine that the thing with Mercy and Augustine is thinking, we put so much work into it that it's a waste, that this is the only way to honor their sacrifice. And now they've had to sit with that for 10,000 years and be like, no, this was not an honor.
Right. Difference between a snap judgment and really putting the time in to just ruminate on it forever. And you have to remember also that actually Christabel, this would be her second suicide in order to provide energy for someone else to like do a necromantic act.
Yeah. There's a reason why Augustine does not like Christabel.
Actually, that's a great point. We fucking know that. We know absolutely that one of the big tensions between Mercy and Augustine is that Christabel corrupted Christabel. Alfred, but it's specifically that she corrupted his brother. And I wonder if that means that she convinced his brother to do this, to commit suicide in order to force Augustine into this position.
That is the implication. That was always the implication that I had from the book.
It's just so horrible. I never thought about it before now. I thought it was just, to be honest, I thought most of it was just making him more religious and more pious and more dependent on John Gaius. That rhymed. But
I always read it explicitly that Christabel entered the suicide pact, and that was the influence that she had on Alfred.
I mean, this explains the entire Lictor thing.
Because they ascend immediately, it's just barely first and second saints.
What about, so what do you think about Gideon and Pyrrha? And what do you think about Cassiopeia and Nigella?
I think that I feel like Pyrrha gives some hints that they tried to do some sort of compartmentalization and it worked.
They did.
But Gideon never realized that it worked. So
yeah,
Gideon
but they would have had to collaborate on it.
Yeah.
They would have had to try to make it. So they were trying to do a better lictoring. I think that's real.
And I think that he doesn't realize that it worked. And so he's been living with that, and he's been, bonkers, cuckoo pants for 10,000 years.
Because he thinks he killed his best friend, even though he didn't really. She could leave him a note. You can write things down, you fools. Anyway.
Well, I think that maybe she realizes that if he becomes aware of her, she's gone.
Or that it puts them at risk from John.
That may have actually been part of it. Is it's possible that it is an inverse of Harrow and Gideon. That it is Gideon that during part of the process, he is somehow compartmentalized and lobotomized to purposefully not be aware. Because when he says, sometimes I lose time to Harrow, he seems embarrassed about it, but he doesn't seem upset. It's she recognizes it. She recognizes it as the same kind of thing as somebody who is struggling through and trying to make somebody else just everybody else just kind of treat them as normal. But she recognizes it at the same thing of I'm insane. Yeah. Sorry, I have to admit this.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I also, so again, we know a lot less about Cassiopeia and Nigella. And actually, one of the only things we know was that in the original Earth, Nigella was Cassiopeia's girlfriend.
Well, and they got married.
Right. Yeah, I'm just saying that like they were like an Abigail Magnus pairing in terms of, you know, Gideon and Pyrrha are best friends. Augustine and Alfred are brothers, blah, blah, blah.
And I have to wonder, given that Cassiopeia has this break clause and she seems to have had a plan for the sixth house and everything, that she also had to have been doing something specifically.
That's what I'm saying. She had a plan for sure. And she's smart enough, and presumably, if we know anything about the sixth house, like moral enough, that this would have been abhorrent and that she would have made contingency plans. We know that she's a contingency planner, that she had like, that's part of who she is and how she structures her world, that she made this break clause with BOE. Like it, yeah, I just wonder if you have to wonder how many of the original lictors are actually the format of lictor that we think they are.
I think that probably none of them are, other than like Mercy and Augustine. Like that, maybe that's not true. I feel like Ulysses and Titania are, you know, NPCs.
Yes, they were literally dead bodies.
And like, so yeah. I think that they would have done it exactly however they were told. This brings me to something that I find very fascinating that comes from the labs this week, and that goes into the last thing, which is which challenges go with which house. And yes. I think that there is even stronger evidence that Anastasia is from the sixth, was her challenge, the ninth house challenge is like basically the other half of the piece of whatever the sixth house is doing.
Okay.
And that this would go also with Cassiopeia and Nigella not being a perfect, or it not being the specific lictor pairing, but doing something to preserve. And then Anastasia working off of what Cassiopeia had been doing to get to that perfect lictorhood, and Jod stopping them.
Right. That Anastasia was trying to do the same thing with Samael, and Jod cut it off. Yeah, I love that. Do you want to go through the lictor steps and talk about who you think? It's not obvious to me for most of these who would be responsible for different ones. I think John actually did a pretty good job making some guesses.
I think that I can place most of them. I think I can place everything except fourth and fifth. So first, I would say preserve the soul. We're pretty sure that probably is the lab we just left, with sticking the soul to the skeletons, which would make it the sixth.
I completely agree on that.
Which means that analyze the soul, which seems like a very sixth house thing.
So your guess is that's Anastasia.
From Anastasia, because she was, and we have the notes that look like Anastasia is working on the sixth house project.
Yeah, she needs her calipers back.
And she needs her calipers back. And she's like, yeah, we've got it. Like, it looks like she and Cassiopeia,
we're collaborating on things.
We're collaborating on that project. And so I think that those two pieces that seem like they are very similar, and that it would seem like it makes more sense that a sixth house thing to do is to analyze it, is actually the ninth house. And that is because Anastasia is sixth house.
Yeah, I don't hate that at all. The other thing we've talked about over and over is that like the modern house specialties do not necessarily have to correspond with the OG lictor specialties, right? So like just because Harrow does bones doesn't mean that Anastasia did bones. Because the idea of analyzing the soul, who knows? I like how that goes with calipers anyway. So remove and absorb the soul. Who do you think that might be?
That's the one that I don't know.
So I feel like that's like a fourth or fifth question mark for me.
Yeah. And it could be like, I was going to go to the poem and see if the poem gave us any like clues. Help. But the fourth is for fidelity and the 5 is for tradition. And so like it really doesn't. And then when you think of what their magic is, I don't know that they tell us what the fourth's magic is really good at. They're good at...
Augustine is the head of the 5th house.
Yeah, and he's really good at the river.
Right. Yeah, so for me, there are 3 that I can't assign, right? Remove and absorb it, incorporate it, and then reconstruction, spirit and flesh working together.
Reconstruction has to be second.
You think that's second house? Okay.
because that's the challenge.
Based on the challenge of transference. Yeah. Okay.
So I think remove and absorb and incorporate. We don't know which one is 4th and 5th, but
yeah, but that's fine. Yeah. We've actually identified a number of these. I do think that consume it is very 3rd.
Yeah, it has to be 3rd. Fix it in place. We got told is 7th. Hook up the cables. We got told is 8th.
Is the 8th.
Yeah. So it really means that there's only 2 steps that we don't have a good guess for.
And I'll add this to my Lictor murder board.
Yeah. Well, I think that does it.
That was a lot. That was an intense episode. I'm excited to see what happens next.
Act 5. Because I know how to read Roman numerals. See you next time, my little nunlets. Well, it looks like our newbies finally know what a lictor is. So Hannah and I are off to buy some titanium reinforced breastplates. But we will be back next week for some climactic lictor on lictor action in chapters 35 and 36. If you want to follow along with us, our reading calendar is available on our website at frontline5th.podbean.com, and you can follow us on Instagram and TikTok, which are linked in the show notes. If you enjoyed this podcast, please tell your friends and give us a 5-star rating anywhere you can. And of course, if you didn't enjoy the podcast, feel free to lie. We have a Patreon, which you can join for access to bonus content every month. You can become a patron. We do love our patrons at patreon.com/frontline5th. Finally, if you have any fun theories you'd like to share with us, feel free to email us at frontline5th@gmail.com. With that, I'll just remind you not to unlock any tombs or enter any doors without permission because, ghosts. Bye!
Frontline 5th is a Locked Tomb podcast conceived by Marie Adamako and starring Marie Adamako, Hannah Grunwald, Brooke Anderson, and John Ryan. Our cover art was designed and created by Marie Adamako, who also edited this episode. Our fabulous music was composed and recorded by Blake Anderson. The Locked Tomb series is a completely dope-ass book series by Tamsin Muir, who does not know we exist and is in no way affiliated with this podcast.